where the sacred meets the secular, offering safe, grounded, practical, and responsible guidance for guides. This is the Psychedelic IQ podcast. As a DJ for 15 years, I was really excited to have Bill come on as a guest for Psychedelic IQ. Music is probably the single most powerful element that I have found to impact an individual's experience in a psychedelic journey, or just in an expanded state of consciousness, whether that's breath work or psychedelics, or however you want to get to that place. I think I have DJ'd over 500 wedding dances. I've probably played the chicken dance well over 500 times. I spent 2.5 years for Carnival Cruise Lines DJing on board the ships. And I know how impactful music is to an individual's soul. And I think there are so many opportunities to use music in really profound ways that a practitioner serving psychedelics really needs to better understand. It's fine to go out and start with the John Hopkins playlist, but if that's your go-to for every journey, I would simply offer that there is so much more out there. And maybe you don't have a great music vocabulary today. Maybe music is not something that really lights up your soul. And that's okay. That's the reason why Bill came on the podcast today. He, I think, does such an amazing job of explaining how it's important and how we can begin to expand our vocabulary. Bill Protzmann's personal mission is to raise awareness of the power of music as self-care. He has more than 30 years experience teaching people the power of music for mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual health, and his students range from leaders in the C-suite to people living on the street. In 2011, Bill launched Music Care Inc., a for-profit corporation, to teach and advocate for practical ways music can be used for your self-care. In 2014, the National Council for Behavioral Health recognized him with an award of excellence, the industry equivalent of winning the Oscar. In 2023, Music Care Inc. launched Music Morphic, an innovative brand with a mission to improve wellness, transformation, and joy. Bill operates as a consciousness coach. Improved consciousness means better results. So whether he is working with someone discovering integration practices for the psychedelic journey, or an established coach who wants to expand their current client base and take their influence to new heights, the quantum consciousness technology at the core of popular culture that Bill uses is the same, and that is music. So without any further ado, I give you Bill. Bill, welcome to Psychedelic IQ.
GV, it's great to be talking to you face to face.
Yeah, good to be talking to you as well. How are you doing today?
Let's see, this is what, Tuesday? I love Tuesdays because they're the day after this amazing thing that I do at this resort near me where I ask people, what's the music on your heart, and we share and stuff like that. And so I always enter Tuesdays on a high.
Wonderful. I've been really looking forward to this conversation. I don't know if I told you, but I was a DJ for 15 years. I quit DJing when I got sober because there was a lot of correlation between my substance use and the people that I was playing music for.
Exactly, yeah.
And it's only been now that psychedelics have come back into my life in such a big and powerful way that I've been able to start playing music for people again. The music's really different, but I get a lot of joy out of it. So I'm really, really looking forward to our conversation today.
Me too.
As we get started, why don't you tell me and the audience about Music Morphic and what you're working on today?
Oh my gosh. There's a big open-ended question. So Music Morphic is a neologism. I had to learn that word too. We needed to create something that said more than care. There's a lot of music care out there. And from actual music therapists, licensed, certified kind of music therapist, advanced degree, right on up to people who are doing end-of-life care with music. Music care is this big old thing. And I wanted to get a word that meant transformation. that people could relate somehow to how this thing called sound and rhythm changes us. And so went to the marketing people and invented a word, and that's musomorphic. It means basically that we're going beyond the average use of music. It's not the background, it's not the foreground, even if we're dancing to it. It goes deeper, right? It goes so deep. And of course, the intersection of music and psychedelics is one of those beautiful ways that we can investigate music and its effect on us more deeply. And that is at the end of the day, what musomorphic is all about.
You said, I can't remember the exact word that you said, going beyond the, you say the primary, the secondary cause or use of music?
Yeah, we're getting deeper into music. We're bringing music more internal instead of just being outside, something that we hear. It's coming in and playing within us in a way that is quite fundamental, actually, to who we are as vibrational beings, but that has sort of been forgotten over the several thousand years now since, I think that the musicologists will say that this change began in around 500 BC, before the Common Era. Music sort of stepped away from its shamanic, I'm going to use the word psychedelic uses, magical uses, and became more of a technique or a mathematical thing. I mean, we have to thank Pythagoras and people like that for all this, giving us this intellectual appreciation for music, which is fascinating, right? But to meet people where we are, not all of us have that kind of understanding of music, but all of us get it in here, right? We all get it at a gut level, and that's where music really gets good. That's where it really gets useful.
So I'm just going to dive right in. Like I want to hear how music does this and how does it affect people all on its own, even without deep breathing, even without an extra substance. Like, tell me how this works.
Well, you know, because you've seen it, right? As a DJ, music is manipulation. And with great power, right, comes great responsibility. So I began to notice this when I was in maybe, 6 or 7. How old is that? Before first grade, around first grade. When I played a song and I noticed people in the room were having these interesting responses. And that got me curious. And I've been curious about that all my life. So roll forward now, and we have things like neuroscience that can explain how this stuff happens. And there's a great organization called HeartMath up in the Stanford area. HeartMath has discovered, I'm using those words, discovered that there's more to what we think than what is in the head brain. And as the name implies, a lot of that is heart. But I think we're now up to a place where we have 3 brains, head, heart, and gut brains, that help us do what we do, help us operate in this world. And music works on all of them. So becoming aware of how that goes a lot deeper than neuroscience. I like to say it's a no-brainer because in some ways, the head brain is just part of it. A good pattern matcher, but if you really want to find out how music is working on you, you've got to feel it, right? You've got to understand the emotional content of music. And for most of us, if Dr. Brene Brown is correct, 3 kinds of emotions are not enough. And that's basically what most of us feel, right? We can feel 3 emotions, and she's identified 87 of them, all of which are available to us in music. And if we are apt, we can learn what those emotions are, how they feel in particular songs, and then begin to open up our emotional, as consciousness is a word, our emotional processor, the nonlinear, non-pattern matching part of us that is the gateway to spirituality. Emotions are that. They open us to the numinous, to the ineffable. And that's what we want. But you can't get there if you only know 3 words, right?
I have Atlas of the Heart
There you go.
on my bookshelf right behind me. So I think what I just heard was that you can take a specific piece of music, a specific maybe combination of sounds, and trigger a specific emotion in someone's body. And there's a high correlation between emotions and the sound that we're hearing.
Absolutely. I'm completely down with that. The interesting thing about it is that one piece of music that I might play is going to trigger everybody in the room slightly differently. And, in general, that's fine if you're the Beatles and you're playing Let It Be. The majority of people are going to get that song the way it's meant, right? They're going to feel what's meant to be felt, but with slight differences. And what we want to be able to do is recognize that each one of us can interpret, which is a crazy word, or feel, or get the music that we love in ways that are uniquely ours. And that all of that is okay. I mean, let it be might be for one person saying, however it is, as bad as it might seem, it's okay with me. Another person might say, I'm going to let that thing alone, whatever that thing is, and accept it. And there's a slight difference, right, in how you feel. And being in touch with those feelings and being able to communicate with one another about that at a feeling level is the difference between skill and not skill. And we need skill.
You just you sparked something in me, triggered something in me just from last Thursday. I go to a yoga class almost every Thursday morning, and I was going to one teacher, and I love her playlists. And last Thursday, I went, and this teacher is no longer teaching that class anymore, and there was another yoga teacher there. And the music was so profoundly different. And 5 minutes into the class, I said, I can't do this anymore. Like, I just want to get up and leave. And maybe I am more sensitive to that because of my connection to music. But what the person next to me might be really enjoying going through a slow yoga sequence, listening to club dance music. I, however, was not.
Right.
But my desire to leave that situation because of the vibration in my body was so significant. Tells me how much music can affect us when we're dropping into this more emotional, physical, more an expanded state of consciousness or a deeper state of consciousness.
Sure, right, because this shuts down the pattern matcher that is our command and control center. When we turn that off for whatever reason, meditation, yoga, psychedelics, we turn that off, we get the rest of it. It opens like you said, it opens the channel to the rest of it. And the rest of it might have a very different response than the one that the pattern matcher is convincing us we ought to have.
So how important is music or just sound in general to an experience in an expanded state?
I think this might be the moment to share one of the expanded states where music found me. It's very close to my heart. And if you're listening to this, it's about suicide, but obviously I survived. But it helps to illustrate how that music works. This is the Friday before Labor Day of 2007. And I'm an empty nester. My last kid has just left for school. All the cats have died. And I'm alone in a pretty difficult situation. Remember 2007, the mortgage crisis was coming. And I was leasing a condo because my kid needed to go to high school, but I still owned a house somewhere else. I was going to lose the house eventually. The second divorce was final. Just like this whole litany of things had ended. And instead of feeling that as, oh my gosh, what a relief, I felt a kind of a hopelessness. And at that point, I've been doing this music thing that I do for 20 years or so, and I decided to go with it. So instead of finding a gun or getting a rope, I sat in the chair, I put on my headphones, and I found a piece of music that I love. And I put it on my iPod, remember those? And put it on repeat. And I sat in the chair under my headphones, and I let the music work. So obviously there's a lot of thoughts running through my head. And the sun's going down, so it's twilight, outside, it's getting darker. And as it got darker outside, it got darker inside. And I decided to trust that process. You might say that I had a bad trip, but remember, no psychedelics involved at this point. But what I felt going through this exploration of the depths of where this music could take me was a heroic journey. It was a descent into darkness. And I knew I was going to be safe and that anytime I wanted to, I could take the headphones off. But I wanted to find out what would happen if I stayed with the music, just stayed with the music. And the suicidal thoughts came. I've been suicidally ideated for a lot of my life, chronically depressed. It got really, really deep. And it got deep in a way that wasn't about thinking, because at some point or another, the head brain checked out, and I was just left with emotion, with feeling. And feeling how dark that could be was scary. It was sad, very sad. But it went beyond sadness. It went beyond grief. And I wept profoundly for hours in this place. And I can tell you that at some point with joy, some point with grief, at some point the chemicals work themselves out and there's no more chemistry left to drive you there. And at that moment, there's clarity. It's like runner's high. Something happens. There's a shift. That shift didn't happen for me as I was sitting in the chair. And what did happen to me was I fell into a very deep sleep, one of those kind of, I don't know, what would you call it? Not REM sleep, but something that's so far below that when I woke up around midnight, the music's still playing in my headphones, took them off and crawled into bed. I was completely wrung out. I was completely physically wrung out after having doing nothing but sat there in the chair. It was like something about what was me needed to be let go, released. I've had that kind of experience in a happy way on psychedelics. And looking back on it now, I recognize what was happening there as something very similar to the psychedelic experiences that I've had. But when I crawled into bed that evening, I was still at the bottom, as low as I could go. Now, I'd been trying to solve a problem because I had a show. I was doing a one-man show, and I was stuck in the program for the show because I had to turn the corner from a very dark place in the show itself into something better, something happier. And I didn't know how to do it. I didn't have a piece of music to do that. And, I know a lot of music, like a lot of music. And I didn't have one that I could use. And the piece of music that I'd been listening to was the one from the show that was dark. It was the one that I needed to turn the corner with, or turn the corner from. When I woke up in the morning, which is not unusual for me, I had voices in my head. And I realized that the voices were lyrics. There was something coordinated about them. And so I grabbed a pencil and wrote them down. And there were like 4 verses and a bridge. And, it was a song. And I got all done with that. And I said to myself, well, this is great, but these are lyrics. Where's the music? Bang, GV, the music started coming. And I wrote that down too. And by noon or something, I had the whole thing done. It was all finished. Music, lyrics, the whole deal. And it was a bouncy, kind of a happy little in-your-face song, about, how come you're not here for me now when I need you, right? That sort of thing. We've all been in love. And so I was sitting there at the keyboard looking at this song, and I said aloud, oh, this is great, but nobody's ever going to sing this. And just as clearly as I'm talking to you now, I heard the words, Bill, you are. And that was the song that I needed to turn the corner on the show. And I learned to play it. I'm not a singer, right? I do not sing. I'm the guy, the big grand piano tuxedo, that's me. But I sang that song and I performed it about 3 or 4 times in that show run. And it was absolutely marvelous to have done that work. The song, I'm terrible at it, right? But it was necessary. It was a necessary thing to do. And looking back on that now from a long ways away, many years later, I realized what was happening. By turning off the pattern matcher and immersing myself in music and allowing the music to work on me, as deeply as I wanted to go, those feelings could come up in safety and they could be released. Nothing more than listening to music, man. And when they were released, the inspiration came. Not until they were released did the inspiration come. And I know that music so well. I could play it for you right now. And the science is, if you play it in your head, it's the same as hearing it in your ears. You get the same physiological response. And whenever I need to be in that dark place, I can go there with this music, just instantly. And that's pretty powerful because there's a lot of stuff I got to release, man. I've got a lot of shit to carry around in the tank. And when I got to unpack some of that, all I've got to do is start the music playing in my head. And it allows that little bit of release of pressure, right? And with that release of pressure comes the inspiration that I need. So that song for me is a tool now. And I love to perform it. You know, it's great to hear it. It's great to play it. But all I need is the momentary pop of allowing that music to play, and I get all of what I need. The mental, the emotional, the spiritual, the physical, it all just comes flooding in on me like that. And that's powerful stuff. I don't know many people that use music that way, right?
I don't know if I've ever heard anybody tell me a story of being able to use music that way, but what came up for me, just like contextualizing it, it's almost your own little version of exposure therapy. You know the thing that is going to trigger this old, maybe it's a current sensation. Like it was an old sensation then, but now you know that, like, I have this sensation in my body that needs to be released, and I know the exact way in, and I'm going to go in and trigger myself and sit long enough, safely enough, for it to all come out on its own, which tells me, which is beautiful, because you not only have exposure therapy, but you also have a volume knob. And in some ways, it's like titration. You can titrate your own experience in really profound ways. Do you think that everybody can use music or sound in that way?
I have personal experience with thousands of people, from traumatized veterans to homeless people, some of the most at-risk people in society, to people, in the C-suite, average people in an audience listening to music, people who have never had a chance to listen to music before, and find themselves in a symphony concert. And I'm convinced that everybody does this. It's just part of how we are as beings. Now, whether you're aware of it or not makes a difference. So learning to use this is sort of the dividing line between people who just let it happen and people who know what they're doing and can actually do something with it.
So it's a learned skill.
It's a learned skill. It's it's innate. We remember this, right? I like to say that I help
a remembered skill.
Remember what they used to do, right?
Yeah. Well, first, thank you for sharing your deeply personal experience. And I think it's also tell folks how you got to where you are today. Like, what is the rest of the origin story?
So there's a real interest in music in the memory care community, Alzheimer's, dementia, and forever, I guess. I even when I was in college, I've been playing for people in care environments. Some of them have, some of those places have pianos and stuff. And one of the things that the piano players at University of California, Irvine had to do was to perform in these environments. Not much of a performance, but you show up. Well, by that time, I've been doing this work for, I don't know, maybe 10 years intentionally, working with Alzheimer's dementia patients, working with caregivers, and watching the effects of music. I'm very curious about what happens, when I'm playing, what's happening in the audience. It means a lot to me. And I could watch the change that took place. Somewhere in the middle of that period, there was this amazing documentary that came out called Alive Inside. And some music therapists had filmed what happens when you put headphones on an Alzheimer's patient who has basically no effect and can't communicate, and then start playing music. And what happened, and you can see this documentary, it's on YouTube, what happened was that people started to tap their feet and come alive, and they'd respond, right? There was like stuff going on that wasn't supposed to be happening. Alzheimer's patients aren't supposed to respond that way. Since that time, there have been many videos. There's a beautiful one of a ballerina, an ex-ballerina, who has severe Alzheimer's, and when they put on the music, in her wheelchair, she starts to do the ballet. It's inside her in a way that nothing else is. And being able to reach that through music was a profound experience for me, to watch people respond. Now, of course, you get all kinds of responses. I mean, you get the good ones that you think are fun, and then you get the other ones which are triggering, right? So some people don't like certain songs, and that's fine. That's totally cool, but they can express it. And I began to think about that. Well, if people can get this kind of response, which looks like almost a brainstem response, right? It's way below the level of cognitive thought. If this kind of response is possible, what else is going on? And over the course of time, neuroscience has begun to tell us that there's a lot going on in there, that we feel things, at a level that is below consciousness. When you get a sound in your ear, there's a long time before it gets to your pattern matcher. What's happened before it gets to the pattern matcher is that it's triggered brainstem things: fight, flight, freeze, feed, or mate. Sorry, famous 5 Fs, right? Music does that. Sound does that. So if we can trigger that low, if we can get to that level, wow, what else can we do, right? And of course, neuroscience is working hard on this. There's this beautiful physical response that we all have to music. You've probably all felt that. If you work out to music or relax to music or use it to meditate, you're actually entraining yourself to parts of music that give you the physical response you want. But none of this happens in isolation. It's all together. So even as you're entraining your physical response, you're getting the emotional one. And the feelings are coming up for you in that music, provided you can recognize them. And this doesn't get in the way. And then, of course, there is what you think about the music. Oh, I like this. I don't like this. This is too fast. This is too slow. This band reminds me of, all the mental responses that we have. But the thing that's really good for me is the spiritual ones, the part science hasn't measured yet, especially in the psychedelic work, because this is the gateway. This is the opening to the ineffable or to consciousness. Pick words for it that work for you. Downloads, inspiration, nonlinear thinking, paradox, all of the unity consciousness that exists in psychedelics is right there in music. It's right there, just waiting for us to open it. And that's where it gets exciting, because that's where the work gets done, right? If we can get into that reliably and open ourselves to it reliably, everything else changes. And scientifically, we know that everything else means mental, emotional, and physical, right? This is fascinating and incredibly powerful. It's way beyond the manipulation we started with, right?
So in your bio, you talk about the role of music in self-care, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically. Tell me about the role of music in self-care. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start higher, and then I'm going to go a little bit lower to maybe an expanded state of consciousness, or maybe just a therapeutic state, and then an expanded state, and then we're going to get really narrow and talk about what the role is in psychedelics. So just that's kind of my thought process, and I'd love you to take us from maybe a top-down perspective.
Sure. Self-care, as we sort of talked about a little bit, was too small. The whole idea of returning yourself to a state of normal is, it's useful. It's nice to fix things that are broken. Don't have a problem with that. But there's so much more than that. And in the realm of self-care, a lot of the therapies, modalities, stuff that's out there are about fixing something broken. You might say it's a clinical response or a therapeutic response that you can give to yourself. Now, no problem with that, right? This music will meet you wherever you are. If you need to fix something, we got music for that. The question is, are you going to go with the science or are you going to go with what you know? So what you know is your music is your most powerful music. That's the science too. The music that you already have is your most powerful music. Those who want to therapy you or fix something will play music at you and say, this is the music you need for X, right? No disrespect, but I believe it was the country of Denmark decided that they were going to prescribe healing music. And they got a bunch of musicians together, and they paid a lot of money, and they did a bunch of scientific research, and they decided on what would work, and they made this album, and you can get a prescription for it, and you can go and get it from your local drugstore. And it will heal you, right? Well, of course it will heal you, because, belief is part of this thing too. So if you believe it, it's going to have an effect. Now, is it the best effect? Is something else work better? Who cares? It's working, right? That's good enough. So that whole idea of self-care, I think, is one that's way overdue. We need to be more involved in caring for ourselves and doing things that are beneficial for us. Diet, exercise, all of that too. But But let's go deeper. Let's talk about our spiritual self-care. We've been relying on other people to tell us what to think and do and feel and eat and all of that for such a long time. We need to have our own awareness. And one of the cool things that happens in music is that you start to get awareness. And after a while, you go, well, wait a minute, there's more than this, isn't there? I can play music and fix my headaches, but there's something else going on. What's going on? What is that? And you can't really get that other thing from a therapist. Thank you, Bill. I see our time is up, right? But I want to talk about spirituality. You can't get that far on self-care. Now, fortunately, that's all changing, right? And this is where we sort of like merge into the next bit of the conversation.
I'm really curious. One of the question that just sprung to my mind, and I want to loop back into this, but right now I have a feeling you have a fair amount of experience in music. I have a fair amount of experience in a different kind of music. I don't create it myself, but I have learned. I used to say when I was DJing a wedding dance that I could play 5 songs at the beginning of a wedding, and I would know pretty much what people were going to dance to within 4 hours.
There you go. Yeah.
Or that they might not be willing to dance at all. What would you say to someone right now who has no not a lot of music intelligence, or maybe a low music vocabulary, or who doesn't feel the same things that you and I feel when we hear music? And in all fairness, like, these are the people I have sat with, individuals who have like play playlists, bad playlists at yoga class, bad playlists in a breathwork ceremony, bad playlists in a psychedelic ceremony, and they really just don't get it. How do people expand or like really develop this musical vocabulary?
What a great question. A long time ago, I used to think that I could, like you, predict, what people would want to hear. And I very quickly learned that wasn't the case. I can't please everybody all the time. So I pivoted around that. And now I start with what's the music on your heart. And even if there's a room full of people, you can get 2 or 3 of them to tell you. Now, obviously, if you're working with somebody one-to-one, and I say, what's the music on your heart? And they're like, geez, I never thought about that before. Everybody's got something. Even if it comes down to a nursery rhyme, there's something in there. And the trick is to unlock that, to get that process started. We've all had that experience. I can't remember the song. What was that song by? And you top out and you go to the Oracle and you try to find it and you Google the lyrics and you have the wrong lyrics, right? And it's like gets this whole head brain trip on trying to find the song. What we really need is an app that, like the What's This Song Siri? What we need is an app where you can hum anything as badly as you want.
Google will do it now. Actually, you can go to your Android phone and you can hum,
and it'll find it.
A quasi tune in your mind, and it will come pretty close. It actually, I've used it a number of times.
Way to go! I don't hum very well, but something like that. Everybody's got music in there. I love the response. I said one day, what's the music on your heart? And they said 528 hertz. And I said, okay. And I've got,
music nerd.
I've got a tone generator, so I can play 528 hertz. So I did that. I said, is this it? It wasn't, but it was a place to start, right? It was a place to start. And regardless of where you are in the scale of, whatever music or whatever you appreciate, or whatever it is, you can always start somewhere. And that place that you start, when you finally get to it, is the place where you meet your music. Is where you, as the listener, find your way in. And often that unlocks everything else. It's like dominoes falling, right? Once you get to that thing, even if it's Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, it's enough, right? It's enough to get, my mother used to sing that to me when I was falling asleep. And then mom comes into the room, and all of a sudden mom's music comes into the room. She used to sing this other song too, right? And it was like, and then you find that. And pretty soon, the person who didn't think they had music in them discovers how much they do have in them. And then it all begins to flow from there.
This sounds in a lot of ways, it just sounds like a different kind of meditation practice.
There you go. Yes, can be.
I also just, for those of you who are listening that might not have a deep background in music, I just want to speak to how important the soundtrack to someone's journey is. Like, if you don't have music knowledge, if you don't have a musical background, you're like, well, this is just one of the things that I have to do to be a guide. I have to go out and I have to find somebody else's playlist on Spotify, and I have to play this thing, and Johns Hopkins create this playlist, so I'm going to play that playlist because it works well. If that is the level of knowledge that you have about music, I would just like to tell you as a listener that music is about 100 times more important than you are giving credit for right now. So if you haven't built that vocabulary, take what Bill is saying and start meditating with music. Start a music practice that can build up some of your music chops. Because if you don't really understand how important it is, you're doing a disservice to yourself and all of the people that you may be guiding or working with.
Amen. I would take it a step further. I'm trained to guide, but I haven't guided anybody in California. It's not what I really want to do anyway. I'm much better on the integration side. But I would suggest that as a guide, the most powerful way that you can give someone an appropriate music experience is to work with them for some time before the actual trip takes place to develop their playlist. What would they want to hear? Now, if somebody's got a lot of music, that's an easy thing. But if somebody doesn't, particularly if you're a guide who doesn't, there's a way in on this. And like building your own awareness, it comes first. That's essential. You can't talk to feelings that you can't talk to anyone about feelings that you yourself don't understand or don't have. It just won't work. And it's the same kind of thing with music. And the ones that are out there, you mentioned a Johns Hopkins list. I mean, there's some good lists out there, some good stuff. But to really make the experience sing for those who are in your care, you want to find out from them what's going to do that for a couple of reasons. First of all, you don't want to step on any toes. You might play something that triggers them without knowing it. And, when you're that vulnerable, being triggered by music that could take you in a different direction, let's say, when you're vulnerable, doesn't feel good. I did it intentionally. Like I knew what I was getting into, but that was because I knew myself and I knew my music. You doing that and offering, say, even Let It Be might be a song that triggers somebody. It shows up in a psychedelic playlist. What's going to happen? The good guidance on this, I think, comes from our brothers who are doing the ayahuasca Icaros. They're sacred songs. They're really important. Some so important that they won't sing or play them outside of the ceremony itself. That's the importance of the music at this moment. It's that sacred. And to come to it with that kind of an attitude, I think is really important right now because of the power that exists there. And to get it right, we have the opportunity. We can communicate, right? I'm going to do a trip with JV. I'm going to say, let's sit down, man. We got to develop a playlist together so that this works best for me. And fortunately, JV, you've got the knowledge to be able to offer that guidance within those that you guide in a way that can help them understand what's going to happen here. Now, should everybody who's doing guiding become a musical shaman, get to that level? Well, no, but if you know the questions to ask, you can help the people you're responsible for to pull out what would work for them. And maybe it's a different list. 20 people in a room, 20 different playlists, right? You've got headphones.
Well, I got to tell you something. I'm just making a couple of connections in my mind based on what you said before and going back to Brené's almanac and all these emotions. So I do a lot of prep work with individuals before we set for a session. And I come to know them and their experiences. And then we develop an intention. And that intention is moving us in a direction that could be self-love, or that could be forgiveness, or that could be any number of emotions, I guess. There's always an emotion wrapped up into our intention somewhere. And I'm just even now connecting. I have this a large library in my mind of songs that I can play in an experience. And what I'm really doing is I'm looking at their intention and I'm looking at the music and I'm trying to match a vibration from a sound to what that vibration is in the emotion. So if we have come to a conclusion, the clients and I have come to a conclusion that like to dip into this old trauma or sadness, then playing music that generally makes someone sad is a way in. I like to say that for the way that I guide, music can do one of a couple of things. It can either pull someone into a new state of consciousness that they need to get to, or it can hold someone in the current state long enough for them to do the work. And I think that's the beautiful thing about the Icaros. Many of the ayahuasqueros or the curanderos who sing traditional Icaros sometimes are singing or chanting that same song for 20 or 30 or 40 minutes because they know that vibration is going to keep people and allow them to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And that repetitive nature allows people to feel the vibration without having to worry about the lyrics.
Yeah.
So
4 hours in the chair, man, or maybe longer. The same thing.
Yeah. Let's go a level deeper now. So we know that music can affect our mental, emotional, physical, spiritual self in a non-expanded state. You had that happen to you sitting in a chair. What happens when we move into maybe an expanded state of consciousness, whether that be through breath work, whether that be through meditation? What is happening in the brain? Do we become more susceptible or influenceable or vulnerable, I guess, when we move into these states?
I love the research that's going on here right now because neuroplasticity just gets a huge pump. Your old ways of thinking and the old patterns that are matched up here get put on hold, and you're able to develop new ones. And this whole idea of inspiration, finding new ways of looking at the same problem, right? Or exploring new opportunities. When the pattern matcher is quiet, that's when those new connections can happen. And you can form durable connections. I think it takes 16 tries. So if you're actually, say, marrying a music to an intention, rehearsing that 16 times locks it in, and you've basically built yourself a new habit around the music for your intention. I've been doing this recently with a song by Michael Franti, Stay Human. The intention doesn't matter, but the more times that I repeat on this, the deeper I get a connection with that intention. And actually, out of that same process comes some inspiration. I've had some new ideas by connecting Stay Human with the intention, right? And that was an interesting side effect that I hadn't anticipated. I basically just wanted to strengthen the intention so that when I needed that, I could, the first couple of guitar notes from Stay Human, and I'm right there in the intention with all the power that I need. I wouldn't be able to get there by thinking myself into it, right? But the expanded state that comes with with the intention of marrying the music and the song, right? The expanded state that opens up puts the pattern matcher on hold and lets me form the new connections that I want, whatever they might be. And I don't have to know in advance. So, that's kind of where psychedelics lets you quiet the mind in a way that you can't get quite as well, I think, from any of the other ways. And no disrespect here. Breathwork's great. Meditation's great. Even music is great for that. But the psychedelic experience, that's got to be like, the best of the best when it comes to shutting down the pattern matcher for a while.
So when you hear Stay Human and you hear the first couple of notes of that, and it makes you feel a certain way, it takes you back into this experience, and it connects you to your intention. What I just heard was you have like a 2-note mantra.
Yeah, it's like that.
Om Namah Shivaya is something that someone with a more Hindu faith might say. But what you have actually done is reprogrammed your mind, hearing a couple of notes, to cut through the pattern matcher, to cut through your prefrontal cortex and take you right into a sensation. But it's intentionally done because you have aligned that song with an intention. Did I hear that right?
You got it. And we have so many ways of getting in on this stuff. And you mentioned one, the mantra is amazing. The thing that is coolest for me is that music catches all of it. I call it full MEPS, mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual. It's all in there. And there's no, I mean, the practice is sort of like letting go. It's allowing the music. You don't even have to come up with the words, right? If you can hear in your head the first couple of notes, you're in it already.
So you just mentioned MEPS, mental, emotional, physical, spiritual.
Yeah, MEPS.
What does it mean to be in full MEPS?
So a full MEPS practice is one that engages all of those things at once. Mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual, bang, all there at once. And there are lots of practices that engage 1, 2, or 3 of them. Psychedelics engages all 4. Music engages all 4. It's possible to get to all 4 through any of the ways in that we have. Like meditation is great. It quiets some of it does some of those things. But meditation doesn't necessarily always engage the emotions. The practice of meditation is one about allowing, like letting things go, right? But what I'm talking about is a practice that wraps around all of them and brings the emotional into it. And that's what sort of sets music apart. Prayer, another practice. There's a petitionary thing about prayers, like, I want this thing. Like, well, if you have an intention, that's quite a different perspective than a petition, right? So you can have both kinds of prayer, but how do you bring in something more than the spiritual, right? How do you immediately bring in the physical? Well, you kneel on the floor if you're praying. How about the emotional? Well, I don't know. Have you prayed and wept at the same time before, right? So there's ways of being able to get in on all of this that you can put your arms around. But with music, it comes from the inside. So instead of having to bring it all together and organize yourself and, get on your meditation bench and burn the incense, with music, it's just there. And you can do it wherever you are. I mean, you don't have to stop to have your intention and music come into you. You can do it on a dance floor. You can do it in a psychedelic trip. You can do it sitting at your desk. You can do it driving down the freeway. You can do it playing tennis. And that's really, really cool for me. It's incredibly portable and, of course, incredibly customizable because your intention might be completely different. Music might be completely different. Did that kind of answer your question?
I think so. And I'm going to actually go one step deeper again. If we follow this funnel down, like, what does this practice look like, particularly with psychedelics?
Oh, what an awesome thing. So the first time I had a guided psychedelic journey, I allowed the music. I said, okay, fine. I'm going to take the full, the full Monty here, right? And fortunately, I had a playlist that was incredible that the guide had picked. And I came out of that experience, I came out of that experience thinking to myself, Bill, you know nothing about music. Nothing. You have no idea what's possible here, right? And I think that may be the answer, is this great curiosity, this great fascination, this great openness to what are the possibilities? What could we do here if we weren't all caught up in our heads?
So let's get really practical. You mentioned something a couple of questions ago. You said you might play something that triggers them, and they're in this very vulnerable state. If you're working one-on-one, it's much more easily to manage. If you have a group of people, you have a very different dynamic. What triggers one person to cry might trigger another person to laugh. What responsibility do practitioners have when it comes to the music that they're playing and how it affects the participants that they're guiding?
This is a question that worries me. There are many reasons why I don't guide or sit for people, and this is one of them. I'm not convinced that I'm capable of providing safety unless I've talked through beforehand every song that's going to happen during the journey with the person that I'd be sitting for. That's not a responsibility that I want. I'm not a clinician, but clinicians, therapists, people who are professionally trained, who've put in the time, if they're going to trigger you as a patient, they really need to know what they're doing. And they really need to know how to deal with the consequences of that. And there are people out there who are good enough to do this. I've been fortunate to work with some of them and to observe some of them in the clinical space, not the psychedelic space, but in the clinical space. And that's a rare gift, to be able to be that good at what you do, that you know when to trigger and how to respond when your client is triggered that way.
I was just thinking of a recent ceremony that I was guiding. And so the ceremonies that I guide oftentimes have themes. You said something earlier about like, what's the music on your heart? And sometimes I walk into a ceremony with a theme because that's what's coming up in my heart. So I'm working on putting together a ceremony soon with a theme of magic and nostalgia. So the fall time for me is very nostalgic. It's going back to school. It's going back to college and seeing all of the people that you haven't seen all summer long. And it's the smell of like cut grass on the football field and all of those things. It's a very nostalgic time for me. Now, I also was watching a TV show and I heard this song, which just blew my mind. And I said, wow, I've never heard this person before. And it was a song about magic. And I said, like this is where I'm going to go next. So I've started to communicate some of that to the people that are sitting in ceremony so they know like what they're getting into. Because the last ceremony that I was hosting, I played Bolero, which is it's a 14-minute march, and it just keeps little layer after little layer after little layer. Such an amazing piece of music. But at the end of the ceremony, we have everyone share. And one person said, "Oh my God, I could not wait for that to end. It was like torture. Like, when is the march going to go away?" And another person was like, "Oh, it was so peaceful. It was comforting. I knew exactly what was coming next. I could hear all the layers coming on." And I think it's fascinating that one piece of music in an expanded state of consciousness can have two completely different reactions from individuals, and how we as facilitators need to know and need to be aware that we are really triggering individuals at the most deepest levels. And to your point earlier, that it's not even sometimes conscious. Something is happening that it doesn't have a direct memory attached to it. It could be a feeling from when we were 1 year old in a crib. So I don't know if there's a question hiding in there or not, or if you have a comment or a thought, but I think that we do have incredible responsibility, especially if there's more than one person in the room.
I'm in complete agreement with you. It's totally different if you're programming a dance or a concert. The psychedelic journey, because of the vulnerability that's exposed there, is a very delicate place to introduce sound and rhythm. And we need to be conscious of that, as guides. We really need to be conscious of that. Most of my work is in integration. And in that integration process, we can kind of begin to catch what happens, particularly if you've done a number of journeys, and organize the music that works for you around what supports you in that place. And then begin to find out, well, I want to go visit this dark place. I want to do this journey, right? And find music that is in you already that helps support that endeavor. is a more skillful way, as I see it anyway, is a more skillful way of being able to facilitate that, rather than just offering, the standard playlist, right? Whatever it might be, because it is so incredibly powerful. I mean, power music, right? We all say power music, but none of us really understand. I don't understand that. It's so much deeper than we can even begin to guess. Quantum entanglement works inside music in a way that is very difficult to explain to the average bear, right? And even to the head brain. The head brain doesn't get that. So to just go launching off into this with any kind of a playlist, it's worth some thought, right? And it's certainly worth considering, if you can, even with a group, it's certainly worth considering saying, hey, here are the songs I'm going to play. Does anybody have like an aversion to any of these? Just right up front. So we can eliminate that possibility. That's a good step forward. Is there anything you want to hear, right? And letting the group kind of participate in that process is a good way to avoid the problems, right? It's to forestall the problems before they happen. And in a certain sense, to relieve yourself of a little liability for having taken people, first of all, to this deep, vulnerable place, and then secondly, messed with them once they're there, right? Through the music that you choose.
Yeah. So continue down that path. You said messed with, and I had written down a question. I think I wrote manipulation. Like, is it possible for a practitioner to mess with or manipulate a participant using music? And maybe whether that's instrumental, or I also think of it like even more so with secular music with words.
Yeah, vocal music.
What is the possibility of manipulation?
I think hypnotherapists would understand this at a deeper level than I do. I know hypnotherapists that use music, ambient music, to help facilitate the process. I suspect that, and it's just opinion here, but through my own experience and through those others that I've heard, that introducing a verbal message in the music is incredibly powerful if you're in a state. I've been doing some work recently professionally with a guy who uses triliminal suggestion. So you're hearing a voice at the top of your head and a voice in each of your ears, and each of them are saying something different over a ambient sound. And the suggestive power of this to reprogram the brain is amazing. It's just incredible. And that's not even a psychedelic trip. That's just like, I know we used to call these things subliminal advertising, whatever, but a message that's riding like a guided meditation over music is a very powerful message. So introducing words, they better be good ones, right? Unless, and this may be the unless your client needs to go that way, unless they need to be guided into a deep experience. And I'm not personally aware of any publicly available stuff out there that can guide a dark heroic journey over a musical soundtrack. But it's going to happen, right? It's going to happen. Whether or not you have the guidance or not, if you have to go there, that's where you're going to go, right? We know. Our internal systems know when we need to do that stuff. Fortunately, we've got excellent guides out there who can anticipate that and offer music that's supportive in that place, or more supportive in that place than, let's say, Let It Be. If you're on a heroic journey, Let It Be is not the music you want. At least that's the music I'm speaking for everybody, right? Like, I know, but it's not the music I would want. I would want something that's got more depth in it, that's going to take me intentionally to that darkness that I need to encounter.
I had never experienced quite so much depth and darkness until recently when we went to the MAPS conference in Denver.
Right.
I had the opportunity to sit in holotropic breath work, or Groff transpersonal breath work. I can't remember exactly what it's called these days, for a couple of days. Brigitte Groff, Stan's wife, put together the two playlists for each day. I breathed on the first day, and it's 4 hours of really, really powerful music. And the way that she used strong, very strong tribal music, and then also at a different part in the journey mixed in a lot of original motion picture scores from a lot of movies. So that's when I was thinking about how to develop maybe your musical vocabulary a little bit, or like tapping into the emotions that are coming up inside of you with music, and go back and watch some of your favorite movies. And rather than paying attention to what's happening on the screen or what the words are, start seeing like how your body tenses up, and then listen to the music. Pay attention to the music rather than the words. And you start to get a better vocabulary. So I had that experience in breath work, and then I brought that into some of the journey work, and it was incredibly powerful and triggered people in all the different ways. Some people were like, oh, this tribal music, drum, shamanic drum, like, I love it. And then other people said, wow, I couldn't wait for it to end. So I think it just it shows us what's happening on the inside.
Your point about movies is very apt. If the movie is well done, paying attention to the visual can help you identify the emotional that the music is trying to support at the same time in the movie. Obviously, it has to be well done. There's one of my favorite examples of this is actually not a movie right now, but the Ted Lasso series makes such incredible use of music. It's almost as if the scenes were written around the songs instead of the other way around. It's that good. And because of the incredible complexity of the emotions in Ted Lasso, the music is very, very important to help guide us in a way that we need to see. We need to see what's on the screen and hear what's being said, but we need to feel that support that's coming from the music that's chosen. And there's some familiar stuff in that soundtrack. You can find it on Spotify. They're all there. But there's a lot that is not, and a lot is very skillfully organized so that it isn't really manipulation. It's more about the congruency of the sounds that you're hearing with the action and the dialogue that's happening. So this is a great idea. If you're listening to this right now, take Jimmy's idea to heart and begin to investigate your emotions as you watch some of the movies that you know, or just remember them.
I will go even farther, and I'm trying to pull it up while we're talking right now just to see if I can see a couple of the series. But I will tell you that Apple TV in general has some of the, especially their original series, has some of the best, most emotional music out of almost anything that I see on TV right now. So I will tell you that Yellow Jackets it's not an Apple TV, but it's I think it's Showtime. Yellow Jackets has been a really powerful inspiration for me. But there are a number of series that are on Apple TV right now where if you listen to them, and sometimes they just make my skin crawl.
Right? Yeah.
And those sometimes that's the sensation that I want to give people an opportunity to feel in a psychedelic journey. And I tell people all the time, like, whatever you're feeling, simply ask yourself, when you're having that feeling, what is it that is making me feel this way? How can I connect this sensation that's happening in my body to either a thought or an old somatic experience, something like that?
There's this notion that is important to, I think, visit right now, of being able to return to a moment in a journey later on. And music can provide us an anchor for that. There's a very important piece of ambient music that takes me back to that first psychedelic journey that I hadn't heard before that time. And whenever I need to be in that place, this music will do it for me. It's fascinating to learn that that's possible. And it's fascinating to practice that in a way, too. I would suggest to anyone who's doing this, maybe you can't get all 4 hours of a playlist, ingrained or something. But if there's a very important piece of music that a client needs, and that can be embedded in a playlist without sort of blowing it all apart, that will help the client come back to that journey in a way that is incredibly therapeutic later on, especially the integration process where you're trying to figure out what the hell happened. Those anchors can be really important because the client already has the music in them, And the journey will help them create new meaning for that music, we might say. Meaning is such a head word, but create a new holistic experience of that music that can be a touchstone later on, in life when you're trying to make sense of it all.
You took the words right out of my mouth, because that was the next place I was going to go. You mentioned integration before, and using integration or using music in the integration process. One of the things that I do when I'm doing one-on-one work is I capture the playlist in Spotify that the client will then get a copy of, and I encourage them the next day. And sometimes I just had somebody send me a message a couple of days ago, because folks were grabbing a lot of my playlists off of Spotify. So I unhid them all. So I unshared them all. But I had a client from over a year ago reach out to me just a couple of weeks ago and say, hey, I tried getting my playlist again and it's gone. Can you resend it to me? Folks are still listening to it multiple years later.
Right.
How do you use music in your integration work? Because if we're doing really good guiding work, we all should be doing integration work as well. How can guides use music in their integration process?
This is really the whole question, I think. Integration doesn't happen after the journey. Integration is a lifetime practice. And to do it well means that you're always doing it, right? And a psychedelic journey is just one more set of information that comes into your lifetime practice of integrating. So to do it well starts with the music. It's actually part of preparation, more so than part of integration. So preparing well means that you come, as a client, you come equipped with your songs, right? I need to hear these songs. GB, work these in your playlist. I don't care what else you play, as long as it doesn't trigger me, but play these 5 songs somewhere, right? And then if, being who you are, you'd say, well, Bill, why would you do that, right? Tell me about this. And that sparks the conversation, the preparation conversation, which, by the way, the prompt is intentional. What is the music on your heart? If I came to you and you said, Bill, you want to journey with me? What is the music on your heart, Bill? We'd have a conversation. And not only would we talk about it, we'd listen to it. You take the time to listen to the songs that are important to me. And in that process of communication that's more than what we can say, you would understand, like you did as a DJ, you would understand where I'm coming from in a way that you couldn't understand any other way, which would help guide your experience of what you're going to do with me as a client, right? So that preparation is essential. Then afterwards, it's like, okay, so Bill, how did those 5 songs go for you? Tell me about what was like. What's the music on your heart now? Like, how does that, what is resonating within you on those songs? So it's like bookends that music gives us. And not only are they important bookends for me, because I'll hold on to those songs, right? They'll be part of it. They're important for the guide to be able to know, to have that understanding. We have such mental words for this, but to be able to resonate with my experience in a way that wouldn't be possible without the shared music beforehand.
One of my favorite questions that I ask folks is, I love this question of, and I'm going to change my intake form. What is the music on your heart? Or change some of my preparation questions.
Yes.
But,
thank you.
I often ask, what music did you listen to in different parts of your life or different time periods in your life? Mm-hmm. So what do you remember listening to? Or what did your parents play when you were growing up? Because, excuse me, there are time periods in our life when we have certain experiences, and those experiences really get locked into our somatic body, and using music to re-trigger some of those experiences and then deal with them in a journey can be really powerful. I also, one of my favorite questions, especially for people who are like, music's not such a big deal, I might ask, well, what concerts do you remember going to, or what were your favorite concerts that you remembered going to? And surprisingly, hearing some of that music in the middle of an experience, it sometimes can just melt someone's heart. Their heart can just open up in a way, and they can be so more comfortable and drop into an experience. So it's really profound. And I think Daniel from TAM Integration often says, an ounce of preparation is worth a pound of integration. So speaking to this again of incorporating music selection into your preparation process can go a long way to help integration. I do have one question on integration. This has happened for me. I don't know who taught this to me, but there are times in a journey, especially with higher dose journeys, where individuals will forget portions of their experience. They will come out of the experience and they will just be like, I was here for a while and then I was gone for a while and now I'm back. And what I have found is that re-listening to the playlist the next day can re-trigger or help people remember some of the missing experience from the middle of the journey. Do you have any idea why that happens?
Yeah, it's the same as with the Alzheimer's patients. Right?
Yeah.
It's something we don't think about, but it's gotten in there. And maybe it's the heart brain, maybe it's the gut brain, but it's certainly not the pattern matcher that is able to process and store that information for us when we need it. I am at this moment, you know how Spotify will add to your playlist?
Yeah.
Well, at one point during the journey, I hit pause and I came back on and Spotify did that and started playing other stuff that wasn't in the actual playlist. And to this day, GB, I have no idea what that music was, but it's some of the most gorgeous music. Because I was right in that place. I got to remember this. Someday I've got to go back to this music. Someday I want this music, right? And if I hear it again, I will know it. But I have not been able to find it. And Spotify, being what it is, it was on the guide system, right? So I don't know. It's probably been recently played. If I'd been present enough, I could have gone back into recent, but I didn't. But what you're saying is so apt, right? Because music gives us those hooks that we couldn't otherwise remember or think about. And knowing that that's there is a great comfort to me, that I can still go back, or later on, somebody can come back a year later and say, what was the music that was in, right? And tie that to some sort of download that happened at that moment that they've just now recovered, right? So yeah, do that. Do more of that.
So a couple really practical questions as we start kind of wrapping up here. What can guides do to use music more effectively in the experiences they're creating?
I'm a big believer in becoming as versed as you can in what you offer. And with music, a lot of us are just sort of taking what's given to us and using it. But a guide who has spent time with the music they're going to offer, really spent time with it, really internalized that, would be a guide that I would choose over someone who was using the Johns Hopkins list or whatever, some other list. That's important to me because that means that guide recognizes in me that there's some sort of shared experience that goes beyond just playing music in the background. That's me. All that being said, this stuff is so powerful. We're going to introduce people to a psychedelic experience, and we're going to toss on top of that something that does mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical all at once. That's a powerful combination. And quoting Superman again, with great power comes great responsibility. Actually, it wasn't Superman that said it. I think it was his uncle, right? I don't know. It's been a while. But with great power comes great responsibility. And being aware of that and respecting that and doing everything in your power to embody that, to really get to the bottom as far as you can of the ineffable nature of that music is so important. It's so important. Obviously, if you've got the same playlist and you're taking clients through it all the time, you have familiarity with that. If that's working for you, great. If you want to change it, if something isn't quite sitting right with you, if you have your own psychedelic experience to that same playlist and it doesn't quite work for you, pay attention to that, right? And ask your clients what's working, what's not. You did that perfectly with Bolero, right? And with the tribal drums, whatever. There's things that are going to work and things that aren't. Ultimately, I would love to see everybody with their own private soundtrack, maybe with those silent disco headphones, right? And everybody's jacked into their own thing. I think we can get to that place. I think we can teach people enough about this, they get curious and want to be able to journey on their own musical soundtracks. I don't know if we're there yet, but I can see that in the future as being sort of the next stage, the next evolution of this when it comes to using music well.
I can see, we talk a lot about equitability and the ability to provide these experiences to more people at a lower cost, and having an individualized experience in a group setting immediately decreases cost. So in that case, giving people an individualized playlist, bring your own playlist, however you want to do that, put some headphones on and do it in a group setting, makes it much more accessible. From my perspective, and I think this comes from the indigenous practices of singing ikaros in a group. When the ayahuasquero brings out his djembe, some people get up and dance. I'm usually purging. Like that, I just know, like, oh God, here comes the drum. Here comes the vomit right along with that. And I think that there is some beautiful power in having all of these people experiencing the exact same soundtrack in a group setting and getting triggered in all the different ways, and then being able to share about it after. I loved what you were talking about power, though, and I think some of the most dangerous humans, specifically guides or therapists, or anybody doing work with people, but some of the most dangerous humans are the ones with power that don't know they have it.
Amen.
And if you are in as a guide, we automatically take a power up position to our clients who are just natively in a power down position. And knowing that your music is, you are wielding a sledgehammer in a power, coming from a place of power, our music can be really, really powerful. If you don't appreciate that, then you could be causing harm with your music just as you could be helping. So if this is new information for you listening to this podcast, just keep that in mind.
Definitely. I should suggest here that musicians who are familiar with psychedelics do the equivalent of a psychedelic journey without the psychedelics, using music. And I've heard this from breathwork people. I've heard this from, obviously, runner's high. There's ways in on this experience that are not solely connected to substance, to medicine. And with some practice, being a musician, I like to practice. With some practice, those things are accessible. Whether you're doing Wim Hof breathing, whether you're doing, if you're a runner, distance runner, especially the ultra distance runners, there are ways in, right? I suspect that enlightenment to a meditating monk is a psychedelic experience. So our job, basically, I think, is to open this doorway and say, however you get there, right? However you get there. But if you're going to practice psychedelics and music together, I think that supercharges the practice. So that you could, at some point, go back into the psychedelic experience just on music. It's kind of why I led with the story that I did, because the similarities are so vast. It's hard to miss, once you've had more than one way in, it's hard to miss the similarities. And as guides, don't we have a responsibility to help people to find their reliable way in so that when they're not with us, when they're not in the circle, right, they can do that?
Are there any things that you can think of that guides should be doing better when we put together a playlist?
I don't have enough experience to answer that one really well, GV. Perhaps, and this has gone around in more than one way, I'm part of Psychedelics Integration. It's a website based somewhere in Europe. But they have introduced supervision, and I think this might be the thing, where guides themselves get together and talk about what's happened. This is a common practice if you're an intern in psychotherapy, for example, or if you're an intern in any of the clinical studies or professions, where you, as the providers, get together and talk about your caseload and what's happening and what works and what doesn't, what you found that's new, what you found that's new that worked. And that notion, I think, of supervision is so critical right now. And obviously, we have the podcast, and that's great. But starting a larger conversation, I think, will help. We are in sort of a self-vetting industry, if you will, right now. And we need to do a good job on that, right? We need to make sure that we don't have unreliable guides or manipulators. This is deep work, and clinical therapy has a different approach to that, but it's one that we could approach too. We could begin to offer one another our wisdom and talk about the things that happen and all of that. In Sanctuary, the church that I belong to, the ministers regularly get together and talk about that. Specifically, if they're leading people, if they're sitting for people, they talk about the experiences to gain knowledge and understanding what was working, what wasn't, what not to do. So perhaps
it's the reason why we created Psychedelic Masterminds.
Exactly.
You can go to psychedelicmasterminds.com, and there are groups of 5 to 10 guides that are coming together to meet monthly, and it's an opportunity to receive peer supervision. So you're not paying.
There we go. Clinical term. We should do this.
Yeah, you're not paying an individual for one-on-one experience, but you get a lot of exposure. And we're talking about business topics. We're talking about supervision and client topics. It's all confidential. So if that's something that you're interested in as a guide, we are also creating a format for that as well. You mentioned Music Morphic at the beginning, and I'm going to start wrapping stuff up with a Music Morphic question. You talked, I guess, about playlists and how important music is. I'm curious what the difference is between like a background playlist and a Music Morphic practice that you are working with people like today.
So a playlist that you might discover working together with me could be one, and we'll make this available on the podcast episode too. Could be one where you want to take a desire and break it down into the intentions that you need to have in order to realize that desire and and to bring that desire to an end state that you want, right? And in that kind of a situation, you might have multiple intentions. I'm working with one of these for myself right now, and each intention is connected to a piece of music. And with practice, then that music becomes internalized to where if you need it, you can just turn it on, like we've talked about. So that kind of a playlist is much different than a more background playlist, dance tracks or just music for a party, that kind of thing. It brings it right up front. And learning to do those well, learning how to construct those well, taking a deep dive into the emotional content that gets you the results that you need, and marrying those results to intentions is just one example of how deep this rabbit hole goes. There's much, much more to it, but intentions are a good way in for many people. Oftentimes, I'll find myself working with people who have to release grief, for example. It's a pretty common one right now, or they're under stress. And there are ways of doing that are evidence-based, scientific ways, which are not just, find a bunch of songs for grief and play them. There's a structure to how that can work. And understanding those things can turn what would be a pretty decent playlist into an excellent one. So there's a lot more into this than there appears on the surface. I think it was Mozart who said that music is the preparation for silence. There's a whole practice in that too. And using music to set yourself up for that moment where you've reached emotional neutral is a highly individual practice, but we need emotional neutral. I mean, we need to be able to be balanced and content and not triggered and, in full anticipation, but while at rest. And music does that. So these are just, multiple aspects of what is in a musomorphic practice that are all available to us right now.
I have this idea of us doing another episode in the next season and having you come on with this encyclopedia of emotions and playing a song, describing the emotion, and then playing a song that may trigger that emotion, like to build some vocabulary, some real-time vocabulary, like on the podcast. We have the ability to play all of this music and audio. So We'll have to do that the next time. It will require some preparation, so we'll give you lots of time to prepare.
And we won't do all 87, but if we could do four of them,
we won't do all 87.
If we do 4, we expand everybody's vocabulary by 25%. That's something.
That's exactly right. All right. Well, I'm going to ask a few questions here in our speed round. So the first question is going to be very customized to you as far as music and a psychedelic experience goes. Words or no words?
Oh, gosh. Can I say it depends? There are times I need guidance and times I don't want it, right? So if I want the guidance, I'll ask for the words.
Okay. Why do you do the work you do?
Oh, it's the experience of watching somebody's face just light up with that ineffable, they can't explain it, but it's gotten in there, right? And watching that happen, GB, that's the best moment in life.
What is the most important thing this work has taught you?
Be compassionate. Allow. Everybody's at a different place. Meet them where they are.
What's the best advice you'd give someone who is new on the path? They might be going through a guide training program right now.
Be patient.
And is there anything that we should have asked you that we didn't?
Yeah, what were the winning lotto ticket numbers for that $1 billion draw? A little late now.
Yeah. Well, Bill, thank you so much. If people want to find you online, how would they go about doing that?
Well, if you can Google my name, it's probably the easiest way because there's so much out there. It's ridiculous to try to coalesce it all into one place. Musimorphic is M-U-S-I, Musi, M-O-R-P-H-I-C, morphic.com. There's handles for that on Instagram and Facebook, websites. The quest is out there. It's ridiculous. I've been at this way too long to have everything under one umbrella right now. And what we'll do is we'll give you a way to get to the Desire, Intention, and Music ebook. Download that. It's got all the science in there, and it's got the how-to. In less than a half hour, you'll be on your way.
We'll have all this in the show notes. And if I'm not mistaken, do you do a weekly live something on LinkedIn?
Oh, good question. So this is really weird. I read Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass, finally. It took me forever.
Love it.
And in that book, she presents the Haudenosaunee Thanksgiving address. And this is 11 minutes. It takes that long to read this thing. And it's a call and response. Everybody, you hear the speaker, and then everybody says, now our minds are one. And it goes through the whole pantheon of what would have been important to the Native Americans in Northeast America 500 years ago. It's beautiful. And I just started reading that on LinkedIn once a week. And if you want to tap into that, find me. It's usually on Mondays. It's at 11 minutes after whatever the hour happens to be that I choose. And it does take 11 minutes to read. And it's a great way to start the week.
Beautiful. Thank you for your knowledge. Thank you for your service. I really appreciate this, and I can't wait for us to do an immersive experience during the next time that we get together on the podcast. So thank you so much.
Thank you, brother.
Thanks for listening to the Psychedelic IQ podcast. If you resonated with this episode and are ready to go deeper into your personal work and practice, visit psychedeliciq.com for more in-depth articles, books, training opportunities, and professionally organized psychedelic experiences hosted in both North and South America. And as always, you're perfect and you're right on time, and the path is wiser than the traveler.